Hey everyone, welcome to this month's webinar on Waterborne Finishes. I'm Todd Schutte with the Bona e-learning team.
And I'm Dee Linston with the Tech and Training team.
What Dee and I are going to go over today, Waterborne Finishes, really it's Bona's bread and butter and the bread and butter for a lot of our contractor customers out there. It's one of the things that we really do the very best. So Dee and I are going to cover a couple different topics. One, what makes Bona different than all the other competitors out there. Then Dee's going to cover how do I choose? Bona's got so many different finishes. There's so many different waterborne finishes out there. How do I choose what's best for my customer and what to push? Then we're going to go to some demo videos. Then we'll be back for some live Q&A. But first, one of the questions we get all the time in the schools is what does make Bona best? Why are you guys different? Why should I use you? And there's some good competitors out there, but I still think there's several things that Bona does better than anybody else, which makes our products better than anybody else. One is we're the only waterborne finish manufacturer that I know of that has our own reactors. In particular, one for polyurethanes and one for isocyanates. It's a big investment on the R&D and production side for Bona, but we think it's well worth it because it lets us make products specifically focused and built from the ground up just for hardwood floors. That means we can make our own base resins. We don't have to wait for Dow or BASF or Bayer Chemical, one of those big manufacturers to come out with a resin that maybe we can make into a hardwood floor finish. There's so many different variables that you're looking at in a resin like that sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. But what I like about what Bona does is building those base resins from the ground up, we can attack those different variables right from the get-go and not hope that we can take care of it later on. And that's why, we've come up with products like Mega in 1995. That's still one of the very best Bona selling products as well as the best single component products out there. And then Traffic in 1998. And if we look at that whole Traffic family now, it's really unique to Bona with Traffic, Traffic HD, Traffic Anti-Slip, Traffic Natural, really covering that upper echelon of finishes, how you need for them to perform and react and apply. So that leads me into the other thing I think we do really well, and that's formulating overall, especially on flow, leveling, and defoaming packages. Because it doesn't do us any good or you any good if we come up with a really good finish, really the performance is outstanding on the floor, but it's difficult for you to put down. You've got to put it down in exactly the right conditions. Floor's got to be absolutely perfect or this product isn't going to go down and look nice. But Bona is so good at our flow leveling and defoaming packages, not just from the initial formulation of that product, but in tweaking it with every batch to make sure it's optimized for you guys when you get it out in the field. And that just leads us into those formulating innovations, again, like Mega, like Traffic, where with Traffic, when we came out with it in '98, it was 3 years before a competitor even came up with a product that was even close to being similar. Why? It's because, again, those big chemical manufacturers didn't have a base resin that was anything like we were making Traffic with. So we continue to do that. We're still the only manufacturer that I know of that has their own reactors. Still the experts at flow leveling and defoaming, and hopefully coming up with innovative products for you guys. So I think that's what makes Bona best. Dee?
As Todd mentioned, we do have a number of different water-based products to choose from. Sometimes it can be a little confusing to the consumer as well as to the craftsmen. But we classify our products as good, better, and best. Why not offer the best when it comes to selling your customer a water-based finish? The Traffic family of products are the best that we have and out there on the market. Traffic HD being the lowest VOC, the most durable, excellent chemical resistance, and a very fast dry and fast cure product. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're having to apologize when you're not using the best products if it's not meeting the customer's expectations. When it comes to a price difference, it's just pennies on the dollars when it comes from using whether it be a good, better, or best water-based product. So always offer your customer the best product and allow them to choose. You also would want to have a backup. We have other products in our good category, which are great products, whether it be Mega 1 or Mega, for maybe a residential remodel project or maybe light commercial. So you definitely want to have that in your pocket. But sell the advantages of the water-based products. From non-yellowing, excellent chemical and scuff resistance. You have fast dry time and fast cure times, formaldehyde-free products. Also, the ability of not having to abrade between coats as long as it's less than 48 hours. Also Green Guard certified. So definitely take advantage of explaining the advantages to your homeowner and offer the best product out there. Todd, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, only something that you mentioned earlier that I thought was a great point on. Sometimes guys, contractors get caught up in the cost of the products themselves, but remember that the homeowner, right, if you do your bidding right, the homeowner is the one paying for the product and making that decision. So it shouldn't matter if it's the cost of Mega or it's the cost of Traffic HD. You're not really paying for it, your customer is.
Thanks, Todd. Now we're going to transition into our demo video where we're showing a couple different ways of rolling the product. More and more guys, as they attend training seminars, some of our schools are wanting to learn how to roll products. Not all products out there are meant to be rolled, but all of our water-based products roll extremely well. So we'll move into the demo, and after that, we'll join you guys for some live Q&A. All right, now that we're on the job site, what we're going to do is demonstrate two different techniques. Todd Schuette's going to show you a technique where he's going to cut the floor up in sections as he's coating out the floor. And the first technique that I'm going to demonstrate will be coating the whole room all at once and not having to cut it off. One of the things you want to make sure you do is keep the floor clean, which is one of our 12 commandments. Part of keeping the floor clean, we made sure that we vacuumed the floor thoroughly. We also used a crevice tool for going around the perimeter. That way we were able to pull any debris that may be up under the baseboards. If there's any gaps, that you're able to get that pulled out of from up under the baseboards. And also we did a good job of tacking the floor. And why would you want to keep the floor clean? You really want to minimize having to abrade between coats. Unlike oil modified finishes where you have to abrade between coats, with Bona water-based finishes and sealers, there's no need to abrade unless you left that product sitting for more than 48 hours. The more you have to abrade a floor and the more it powders up on you, the more product you're taking off of the floor. So our goal is to treat every coat like it's the first coat, and that way we don't have to abrade between coats unless it's been more than 48 hours. All right. Now to the game plan. So we've kind of discussed our game plan and how we're going to work the room. And it's important that if you have a helper, you talk to your helper in regards to how you guys are going to work your way out of a room. In regards to tape, we have a tape line in one area. Well, we're going to demonstrate what a dry line is. And with the dry line, as long as you go back over one board into where you've cut in, the finish will have a chance to melt back into itself. But depending on how long that line will be left there, you may feel that it's better for you just to put a tape line rather than trying to stop on the board seams. All right, so now we're going to mix our finish. Part of mixing your finish is making sure you get everything mixed up well, which is one of our 12 commandments, mixing the finish as well as straining your finish. So I'll take a second to really mix our finish up, get part A mixed up before we pour in our hardener. You may want to use gloves for this. Different guys have different chemical sensitivities, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we start coating. But, the goal is to keep the product in the jug and not on your hands. So I'll pour the hardener in, and after doing that, just make sure you get all that down in there. Put my cap back on, and now we're going to mix part A and part B up. And it's important that you really start shaking this immediately. It's a very reactive product once you pour the hardener in, so you want to shake it different ways, up and down, side to side. Just get a good mix on there to make sure you get all that product mixed up. All righty, good mix. So now what we're going to do is put our strainer in. Today we're going to use pantyhose as our secondary strainer. You got your primary filter. Pantyhose is going to work as our secondary filter. Just going to stretch that over your primary filter, stick it into the jug, and trim off the excess. Now we're going to get the purest product coming out of this jug, out of this water-based finish. So we're going to let that sit for about 5 minutes, and while that's sitting, I want to talk about, another part of keeping the floor clean, whether you wear a medical type bootie to put over your shoes, or whether you're going to coat in your socks, as I'm going to do today, or if you have special coating shoes, then that will work good. But again, you want to keep that floor clean to minimize how much abrading you have to do after your first coat dries. All right, so what Bobby and I are going to do is we're going to show you one technique of coating the whole room at one time instead of cutting the room up into sections, which is Todd Schuette's going to show you on the next demo. So we're going to work in thirds, kind of keep working the whole room back, and then he'll jump around. We'll kind of coordinate and talk to each other as to where he's going to go next as I'm coating out of the room. But before we get started coating, what we want to talk about is applicator prep. With the roller, it's important not to have your roller too saturated with water, because the more water you have coming out of this roller, especially on a matte sheen, it's going to show shiny streaks as you work your way out of a job. You're going to want to really thoroughly rinse out your roller, keep it dampened, but spin it free of excess water. Bobby's going to be using the cut-in pad, and with the cut-in pad, same thing. You really want to defuzz it first, whether you're just kind of wiping it down with your hand. Some guys will take tape and use on the different applicators to help defuzz those applicators. Again, Bobby's going to cut in along the wall, and one thing I'm going to do once Bobby gets going is I want to make sure I get my roller nice and saturated with finish. That way, if I don't, I'm not waiting on the roller to pick up that excess product. I want to make sure it's nice and saturated so that when I get going. Also, I feel that rolling is probably one of the better techniques. It's not the only technique, but one of the better techniques because of how it lays the finish out. My personal opinion, you can really get a nice, almost tabletop finish with the roller because of how much it lays the finish out. All right, so he's cut in. I want to make sure I get my roller nice and saturated. The purpose of the cutting guy is really just to get as close to the baseboards as possible so that the roller doesn't have to hit up against the baseboard. So again, I'm rolling over where he cut in just to make sure that that film build thickness is going to be the same. And now he'll pour me a puddle up across the wet end area. I'm going to set my applicator down. That way I'm not pulling it across the room and possibly having drips. And he'll just work right around that. And depending on the thickness of his pour line is going to determine how far back I'll pull the roller. So starting over here where he first cut in along the wall, I'll just kind of come down and up. The puddle is an indicator of where I want to get past. So I drop my roller right behind the puddle, a little bit of pressure to help pull that puddle back, no pressure going forward. And you just repeat. Now with the roller, the cage side is the heavy side. So I always want to make sure I'm working towards the cage side. A little bit of pressure coming back, no pressure going forward, getting past where he cut in. Now you can roll as slow as you want, but one thing you'll notice, the slower you move this roller, that puddle will just kind of sit there on the roller. So you want to have a nice smooth technique, and you also want to have a nice feathering technique to feather past where you roll. If you notice you had a harder line, before you get too far going, you could step here and just lightly roll across the grain if you didn't do a good job of with your feather technique. Once I get halfway down the room, what Bobby will do is he'll start to pour into that wet area, and I'll switch and put the roller on the other side of my body. That way I can see what I'm getting ready to walk into in regards to what he had already cut in. So there, noticing a little line there, so I'll just kind of come, feather that out. One thing you may want to do is move yourself further away from the wall when you go with your pour line. That way you leave yourself enough room to feather back past your puddle area. All right. Now, once I get close to the wall, what I'll do is I'll flip my roller over, try not to put too much pressure, and then feather out that run. Now I'll come back over here. Bobby's already cut down the wall. So again, I want to make sure I roll over where he's already cut in, feather up, and then keep the same process going. A nice feathering technique is really important because if you have a hard lift up, like similar to that, you'll end up leaving a hard stop line. So you can roll right back over it. You don't have to pick your roller up on the back pull, but you always want to feather on the forward pull. Push, push, pull. Again, dropping your applicator right behind the puddle so that you can get past the puddle. Halfway down the room, now I'll switch to the other side of my body. That way I can see where he's cut in at. A little bit of pressure coming back, no pressure going forward. If you don't put any pressure, what happens? That roller will just kind of go over and leave that heavier spot there. So that's why it's important, just a little bit of thumb pressure. Don't be too concerned if it looks like it's a little stimply. These products level and flow out great, but if you have too much airflow and you're putting it down too thin, you will have an issue there. That stimple will dry right into the floor. So Bobby cut in there, he cut in there. So no airflow at all with water-based products. Sometimes you're working in a commercial application. You may not be able to control shutting down the unit. So in that case, what you'll want to do is probably you want to be towards the lower end of the coverage rate so that you can get it down thicker. That way it has a chance to level and flow out before it has a chance to set up. And that's when you can't control your airflow. So what I'll do is to kind of help Bobby out, I'll kind of come over here and put a little excess product down there. And then I'll jump back over here. So you can move around. The key is not to leave your line sitting too long. So if I need to come across here just to kind of keep that line wet, you can do that. All right, so right now to leave us an opening to get out of the room, I'm just going to shorten my pulls. I'm going to go down the wall. This will be the next area Bobby's going to cut in. Just give him a little bit of product there as I'll come back in and now blend these two rooms together. So Bobby's going to reach right up against the baseboard. And then I'm just going to roll over again where he just cut in. Make sure I use a feathering technique. And if Bobby, if you can just cut around that threshold for me, just right around the door. I'll come over here, move this line a little bit. Again, the reason for me to get back into this line is just to keep it from staying too wet. And now Bobby will kind of go around that jam as well. Excellent, sir. All right, so I'm going to come down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this puddle into the closet. And after about 3 or 4 pulls, then what I'll do is I'll go across the grain to feather where I stopped up against the wall. And just kind of feather that out lightly. Come back in here. Pull into the closet. So I noticed that my applicator is starting to get a little bit noisy. So what I'll ask Bobby to do is just to pour me a little bit more into my puddle along here as I come and work around this door jamb. So if you can give me a little bit more product. Key is to be comfortable. Sometimes water-based finish can drive a guy nuts, but you just, as long as you feather everything out, you'll have a chance for the product to level and flow out. And what I'm going to do in this particular room is I'm going to roll cross grain. One of the nice things about rolling is, you can roll in multiple directions. Although we prefer you stay with the grain as much as possible, depending on the layout of your house, you may need to go across grain. And you normally want to do that in an area where it's not too visible. So depending on where your windows are, where you have walls are, is a good area to where you can cross and the product will level and flow out just fine. So I'm just going to roll over all areas where Bobby had cut in, come down this wall, take my excess juice and put it back up there. Alrighty, so I think I have enough product here to where now I can start rolling the cross grain. I'll do it here, feather up. You come down. Working in a tighter space, you got to make sure you have a nice little pendulum type motion so that you're not beating the wall up. And then I'll come back here and lightly feather. Since there's excess product, I'll pull it back, feather up. And now I'll jump to this side and do the same. My applicator is really saturated, so I'm not asking Bobby to pour any more product out at this point. Now I'll come here, cross it, cross that wall too, and now I'll work my way out of the bathroom. Here, feather up. Again, going across grain, you just want to make sure you have enough product so that it has a chance to level and flow out. And then Bobby will cut me through the doorway here. Here we are just going to work a section at a time and go back to working with the grain of the wood. Again, I'm going to set my applicator there, always setting it with the grain of the wood and not cross grain. I'm just going to go roll across where he cut in. I'll roll across this front area. So in this case, we're not using a tape line. What Bobby's going to do is when we're ready to, get out of this area here, we're just going to cut what we call a dry line. Stand on the bore seam as much as you can. And then as we start to come down the hallway, we'll join back into this room. And I'll demonstrate that once we get to that point. So again, I'm going to roll over all areas that Bobby cuts in at. Bobby's going to pour me out some product. And we'll continue to work our way back down this room. All right, so we have a dry line here, and once we get back down into this area, Bobby will make sure he has enough product on his applicator to where he'll cut one board back into that dry line, and then that'll allow us to work our way out of this room. So this is one job site. So as we go into the next room, we do have a tape line here in which the tape line will be peeled up immediately after cutting up to the tape line. The reason for that, the longer you leave that tape there, it'll cause the finish to want to develop a hard edge. By peeling it right away, you give the finish a chance to really level and flow out, to ease out. It's not going to go pouring into the next board, but it'll have more of an eased edge versus a hard edge. Rolling down a hallway is really a great technique because with the T-bar, it can be a little tricky, whether you use the S-turn method or you try to coat sections of the hallway and then you end up tight roping a smaller area where you're using a S-turn method. But if you've perfected that method and it works for you, then keep doing what you do. All right, feather up. I'll come over here, feather down, feather up. And now I'll just pull my way down the hallway. I'll roll my way. Also, some guys will like wrapping a towel around the bottle to keep from the drips, dripping onto the floor. If you pour over the top, that may be a good idea to have a towel wrapped around, but if you pour off the side, you're less likely to get as much drippage, if any at all. And so on the tape line side, Bobby, I'm going to have you just go ahead and cut all the way down that tape line. And then what we're going to do, as soon as you do that, I'm going to have you pull that tape right away. So the key with Bobby cutting into the area that has already started to flash off is that he's putting enough product down to where now I want to make sure I just stay on the wet side of where he's cutting in and not get back up into that room, which will cause that roller stempel look to happen if I get into an area that's starting to flash off already. So once we get to where we're working out, I know I told you guys this was one job site, and that's a separate room. We're going to work out of this doorway here, and what we don't want is to leave, a lot of debris. So Bobby's going to cut in. Unlike the snowplow tool where you're pulling a lot of product across the room, here you're laying the product out, but you always want to check that last area that you're getting ready to coat to make sure you get a nice pour of some fresh product. And if there's another type of floor here then Bobby will be able to kind of clean this up, make sure he has enough product, and he can feather up to the carpet or whatever type of floor we're meeting there.
The method I'm going to show you is rolling in sections, which we find is really helpful. One, if you're working by yourself, or two, maybe if you're working a larger cut-up house and stuff, you know, instead of having both guys working together, maybe guys are getting in each other's way, to spread them out where they can work alone but still be really effective in getting the finish and stuff down. And then obviously having a game plan working together to get out of the house so nobody gets finished into a room or a corner or anything like that. But this can be real helpful just as far as maintaining full control over that job, and I'll show you what I mean. Because we're just going to teach you to coat a section, and then you're going to move back and you're going to coat another section. All we have to worry about is working that path down, but I'll even show you if you get stuck and all of a sudden you got to just clean up that finish and go do something else and then come back. How do we take care of that in the middle of the room and not leave marks in the floor? But having a game plan is still important. So obviously I've only got this portion left, but still if I had a closet or something like this where I don't want to jump in and out and have that, you know, pulling me off of my regular flow. So anything like this that I can where I've got a nice transition across there, I'm going to go ahead and coat first. So I'll go ahead and pour some of the finish down. We'll finish out this closet. I'll pull a dry line at the doorway. Then I can decide if I want to, you know, roll this. Probably not, because it's a closet. It's not going to matter if it exactly has the same thickness of finish as the rest of the floor. But if it was a bathroom, if it was a pantry, something that's more visible that people are actually walking into, then I'd want to make sure that I do that. So just being careful when I get out towards my edge where I want to pull my dry line, that I don't get out into the main body of the floor too much, and that I do have, you know, a nice coat. Even though it's a closet, we want to do a good job everywhere, so I'm going to make sure that I've got, you know, a nice even coat. And then I can set my roller, if I'm by myself, I can set it, again, just inside the line there. And now I'm going to come up and I'm going to try to follow a board seam as much as I can. But if I can't, you know, just so I'm going in a relatively straight line down that floor for my dry line. And of course, looking back across my work to try to make sure that I'm not leaving any missed spots. And I want to try to marry those up as I go down the floor here. So now what we're going to do is, again, I'm just going to teach you to roll a section. And when you've got that figured out, you'll soon start to see how you can really keep control of that job. So I'm going to pour the finish out, kind of encircling the section that I want to do. And of course, across the headboards where I'm up next to the trim work and stuff, I want to pour finish out and cut in just like they were doing, you know, back in this room here. Once I get out then, and I'm just doing sections, all I will do is pour a little across the front, and then I'll pull some of that up the sides and then roll the middle. But easier to see once I get going. So you kind of want to pick, you know, where you want to go. So I'm going to go out and try to follow this board line all the way down. So I come back over to where they cut in and had the tape line. So I've kind of got my first section figured out here. Go ahead and cut in like we have some trim work up here. And then when I get to where they had the tape, again, I want to take my cut-in pad and I just want to follow it up and overlap a little bit onto where they've already put finish. Okay, I don't need to go way over on it, but I don't want to miss anything either. But really, again, I'm just trying to follow that board line down and make sure I've got finish on everything. And then same here, when I come across to this side, got enough finish in my cut-in pad, and I can bring this up here. Now, because the cut-in pad, as Dee and Bobby were showing, the cut-in pad puts it down differently, different rate than the roller. So I am going to want to come back, and whether it's rolling, you know, where I cut in, and like Dee was showing, against my trim work up front, to roll across that, so I make sure that that has the same application rate. Or when I'm rolling up the sides, and if I get a little too much finish, I can just simply push it back out to where I'm going to need it. But if I'm rolling up the sides, just overlapping a little, I don't want to get over into that too much, because then I could start leaving some stipple marks if it's just started to set up. Then I want to roll up this side as well. And then we're just rolling the middle. So what I like to tend to do is just slide my applicator, slide the roller up behind my puddle and pull it out, just to kind of get stuff spread out in that area. And then I can go back and run my feathering motion back across the floor. And with the cage side leading, because that's the heavier end, like Dee said, so I'm feathering on this side of the applicator, except when I get to this side, then I may want to turn it over, follow it a little more just down that line so I have a better line of view. Okay, so that's my section. So again, now what I'm going to try to do is I'm just going to pour a little more finish out across. I'm going to take my cut-in pad and set the edge of my next section, trying to stay along that board seam as much as possible. Then just leave your cut-in pad there, move back to your roller, start spreading product out. And you may, when you swing it around your puddle, put a little pressure on it to help pull that puddle back. Otherwise, sometimes, especially if the puddle's too thick, you might float a little over the top of it. And then when I get everything kind of rolled out in that section, again, I'm just going to go back and do all my feathering strokes. And this kind of shows, again, how I can keep, really good control now over my job site or each section as I'm going. If something would happen and all of a sudden I've got to end this, something happened in another room, or I get an emergency phone call, something happens where I've got to stop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go put my roller up. Right now I'll just set it here. I'm going to put my roller up and I'm going to finish a real fine feathering stroke with my cut-in pad just out into the floor. And you can consider this kind of chasing the grain, with your applicator, as opposed to when we're doing it with a scraper or whatever, when we're doing a repair. So I want to just spread this real thin out into the floor, and then I'm going to have those little fingers on the end that kind of blend in with my grain pattern. So I don't have any problem just walking away from this now. In fact, we'll do that. I'll start another section here. We'll leave that right as it is, and then we'll come back when we do our next coat tomorrow and blend all that in. Actually, we're just going to go over it with another coat, and you won't see any of those marks in the floor. So again, usually I want to try to finish my path all the way through, and then if I have to cut off, that's what I want to do there, because once I've got this line established, again, it doesn't matter if this thing's a little dry, fully dry, 1 day, 2 days, I can come back to it whenever and run my cut-in pad along the side and fully blend everything in. And again, if I'm in the middle of the job and I've got to cut off in the middle of the path, then I'm just going to feather it out with my cut-in pad into the floor and go on from there. Okay, so we're cutting down the sides, establishing the perimeters of our puddle, then taking our roller and just rolling everything out. When we get to the end with this next section, like Dee was showing too, I'm going to be using the roller cross grain. And why the roller is such a great tool is because it doesn't, like the cut-in pad and like your T-bar, it doesn't pull through the finish, but it just lays the finish straight down. So it doesn't matter or shouldn't matter if I'm going this way on the floor, cross grain on the floor, 45 degrees on the floor. It's putting it straight down everywhere I'm at. And just to be a little safer on this side, to make sure I don't leave any hard marks, I'm just going to feather out this side of it as well. So the roller is really going to be your best tool choice for applying on difficult patterns, different parquet patterns, where you, herringbones, chevrons. You've got stuff running in all different directions, and with a T-bar and or cut-in pad or brush, you know, you're not going to have any choice but to go cross grain. Anything that pulls through the finish is going to tend to leave more of a mark, where anything that I use that is just putting the finish straight up and down is going to have a lot less of a tendency to leave marks in the floor. So when I get to the end of my path, again, I can pull this down, I can cut in all the way around. Set my cut-in pad there in case a little starts leaking out. I can easily feather that out. And then like Dee was doing in the other room, I'm just going to pull all this down, work a little back and forth. But as a best practice, even though we said that you can use this, you know, cross grain, and we'll do it right here. I'll feather everything out cross grain. As a best practice, anytime that we can, of course, we want to follow the grain of the wood. But I'll just go ahead and feather out everything here, cross grain. You can see that's kind of where I started. And if I want to, I can go ahead and feather my straight line out. Okay, so now I've got one path done. I've got my little halt area right there. But now where do I go? I could start here and work back the other way, or I can always come back to the front and start here. Now, depending on where my door's at, so we're going to pretend the door is over here. So I'm going to do a little narrower path here so that I don't work my way into a corner and that I have a little path still to work out. You know, this is going to start drying and setting up a little bit. You may not want it to get too dry. But I think regardless of how dry it gets, my method is going to be the same in that I'm just going to overlap a couple hairs from my cut-in pad and let that kind of be my guide of making sure I've got finish on both sides of that board seam. And then I'm coming back up, and I like to turn it on the long section of my cut-in pad, and then again just draw it down. Draw it down, I'm overlapping just a little bit, you know, 1/8 of an inch, just so I know I'm also getting on the other side of that board seam. If you get over too much and it starts to drag, just depending on how dry that other side is, you know, then I may get some drag marks in the floor. So I just want to overlap it enough so that I've got finish on both sides. The other thing is I'm not worried if I've got some slight misses there either, because I'm putting on another coat, and what I'll do on my next coat is if for some reason I can clearly see what board seam I ran a path down the coat before, I'm simply going to move over one more board so that Now instead of this seam that I'm trying to make sure I've got covered with finish, it's going to be this one or this one. So it's easy to adjust then between coats of finish just to make sure you're getting everything covered. And just as Dee was doing on his side, especially when I'm next to trim work, if I think I've left some heavy marks up against that wall, as long as I've got the space, right, I can walk over here, make one run just down this wall, feather it up, and get rid of those heavy marks. And then I can always, if I've got a bunch of finish down here, I need to spread it out a little bit, I can do that as well. Okay, so that's working a section. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue working sections all the way back down here. When I get to here, I'll probably turn around, work it back into these, tie these together, and then I'm going to work this smaller section all the way out the door. Again, if I happen to get to a spot and I didn't pull my cut in far enough down, I can take my roller and just be careful with it. And I mean, I'm doing the same thing anyway, even if I've cut down this side, I'm going to come back, I want to roll over the top so I get that same type of coverage. So I can just carefully roll it down that board seam and take care of it that way. All right, so if I've got to turn around and do this section and come back, just like Dee was showing, I may want to have a little puddle of finish here, that's on, tying in my wet area so I don't get a dry mark there. And I can come back here and start down this side. The other thing I could do there is what I did right here. I could just, excuse me, I could just feather that out into the floor and then tie it in when I come back. But if I can, I think it's a little safer to run a puddle. And you're only limited by the size of the section that you want to run by the length of the pole. So if you get an extension pole, you want to run longer sections, you can obviously do that. Again, the whole thing is just, though, keeping control over your job site and that area and make sure you're not getting too much out there where you can't control it. And when I have no option to walk back, across, I always like to keep my first pull here a little narrow. Look out where I've got finish so that I can definitely reach back across and make that little feather on my headboards if I need to. And then if I do have a little streak, I can always reach out and just pull it back as well. And then like Dee showed too with the other method, you can work it, from both sides. You just want to, again, be wary of any feathering that needs to be done, anywhere where you may be leaving a heavier mark, and make sure you go ahead and make your feathering passes to take care of those areas before you get too far away from them. Again, our feathering is always like an airplane landing and taking off. So no hard marks. Again, if that puddle's been sitting there a little bit, you may have to put a little pressure on it to draw it back in. And also listen to your roller. It'll usually tell you want it to make a little bit of noise, but if it gets too noisy, if you got too much finish out there, it's going to be sliding across the floor versus rolling. Or if it gets too dry, it kind of gives you that feedback as well. So again, pretending that our door is down this way, now I'm on my last run. And just use use your light, use your reflection of the finish where it's already been, where it's wet, where you can still kind of see that stipple. Sometimes you can even angle it a little bit like a snowplow, like I got way too much finish along that side. So if I need to, I can angle this a little bit out the wall, just to ease that puddle back over this way. Then as Dee said, when we get to the end, one, I want to have a little plan. What am I going to do with my applicators as I get outside? So we usually like to have a little paint pan outside the door. You may also need a plastic garbage can if you get way too much finish. Got to take your cut-in pad and get the extra finish off of there. And then, of course, if it's a key transition point, which most doorways are going to be, I want to make sure that all the dirt and debris, everything is cleaned up there, and that this is a real clean application in that doorway. So I can pull down to establish my final section. If I need to, I can take my cut-in pad and finish this up here. But I always like to then dip back into the room with the roller, again, just because of the different application rates and the different, maybe even slight look you can get with both of them, and finish up with the roller across everything. But you might have to finish up right at this threshold, obviously with your cut-in pad. Okay, so that's rolling in sections. Again, I think it's a great way to maintain full control over the whole job site when you're rolling. I can jump in and out of a room if I finish that path. If I don't finish the path, I could have two guys working in separate areas of the house. Just a good technique to know how to work, working in sections down the floor as opposed to trying to do the whole floor at one time. When we're done with our applicators, obviously we're going to wash them off, rinse them off real good, squeeze them out. Then we're going to put them in baggies, gallon baggies. And if it's going to be too long before we get back to it, we'll even put that baggie in a freezer and freeze our applicators. That way they're not going to get moldy and mildewy in between applications if I've got several weeks or a month before my next finish coat. So take care of your applicators so they take care of you. All right, so we're back after an overnight dry. Dee and I are just going to talk about both sections of the floor a little bit. And typically our goal is going to be that we've kept the floor so clean that all we have to do is tack it, dry tack it, or wet tack it, put another coat on. But we're always going to walk the floor, and some guys it'll be their best practice to always abrade before the last coat, but because we know a coat of finish is so thin, again, we want to preserve all of that we can. So we think doing a better job of keeping the floor clean, walking the floor, just looking for pieces of debris, hairs, other finish film issues, and taking care of those in a spot manner, probably better for the overall floor. But if that's your practice, to just go ahead and lightly abrade the whole floor just to make sure you've got almost everything accounted for, that's fine too. So one of the things I want to talk about is when I was working in sections, right? And I said, hey, if you've got an emergency or something, you got to end that section. What are you going to do? So what I did is I had taken my cut-in pad and I just pulled real thin feather strokes down away from that edge. And they were very difficult to find this morning. And then I also did it on the other area where I started, pulled my next section down there, then I feathered back that way. So I've got a whole section in here that doesn't have a coat of finish on it. It still has the coat of sealer, but so what would I do to come back then and to restart working in sections? Well, I'd simply pour the finish across where my feather marks are coming down. I'd work my next section with the roller and everything else, but then I'd take my cut-in pad, I'd come around to this side and simply pull those really thin feather marks into this area of the floor that had already been covered. And that is going to be a seamless, invisible repair. You're not going to see it. So that's how I would do that, all right? But that, again, I like with the working in sections because I feel I've got total control. Even if I have to stop in the middle of a section, in the middle of the floor, I'm not concerned about having to come back, restart that, and not see any lines in the floor. One place where I did have a line, right, where I'm working that section down, and For the most part, I did a good job just drawing the cut-in pad down that board seam and not going over with the roller back onto the area where I had already coated. But I just want to re-emphasize that point. So there are a couple areas where we do have some stipple over in the floor left by the roller because this side was starting to set up. I got over into it with the roller. The roller marks didn't flow out from that area. So when you are working sections, so if I've already done this one, now I'm working this section, just make sure you're pulling your cut-in pad, you know, overlapping just a couple hairs on that thing over into that section. Get as close as you can with the roller, but don't go over that mark, over that board seam with your roller, or you're gonna chance leaving stipple in it. All right, so typically what we're gonna do is just walk the floor before our final coat with some of these tools. So we might have a block with a maroon pad on it, maybe just a maroon pad itself, maybe a diamond disc. This one's 240 grit. And these little nib files, so this is a coarse nib file, they're come from the automotive industry. They work great for taking out pieces of debris, hairs, because they won't affect the finish around it. They'll only take out that uneven portion that's up above. So here we have, I don't know what it is, a little piece of debris that ended up in the floor. Of course, it's right in our doorway. So we're gonna take the nib file, we're gonna rub it down with that to take it out. Then we may take our maroon pad, just rub that out a little bit more. Then we'll take a wet rag, one to just clean up that other little dust, but two, that'll give us a little preview of what that repair is gonna look like, if anything's gonna show up there, if I went too deep, went back down into finish, stain, or whatever. But that looks good. So these little nib files work great. Again, maroon pad, diamond, maybe a block with a maroon pad and diamond or something on it as well. All right, so let's go back over to D now.
So as I walked this part of the condo, there were three things that I noticed. We had a heavy spot in our hallway where we didn't do a good job of feathering up as we were rolling. And so you have a heavy mark there. And then the cutting guy in the bathroom was a little bit thin on his cut in, and I didn't roll over it all the way, so you noticed a little thinner area in the corner of the bathroom. So to fix those two areas, you just really want to be as aggressive as you need to be to take down that film build thickness. And depending on what abrasive you're using, you're going to want to minimize that scratch. So let's just say if you started out with a piece of 80 grit paper, and then you would jump back down to maybe 100 grit, and then you'll do maybe the diamond to minimize that scratch, and then follow that up with the maroon pad. So all you're doing is you're trying to knock down that film build thickness so that it matches the rest of the floor without getting down into your seal coat. So what we have here is we have a hair that's in the finish, and of course that didn't come from me, but nevertheless it's in there. And so as we walked it, we saw the hair, and we're going to do the same thing that Todd showed over there. We're going to use the nib file just to kind of remove that hair, and then we'll go into some of our finer abrasives just to blend everything in. So again, the nib file, you only push that in one direction, and as you'll see, it'll scratch the hair off without scratching the rest of the floor. So once I got the hair removed, then what I'll do is I'll come in with the diamond and just kind of go over it. And then after the diamond, I'll take a maroon pad and rub that over. And then I'll take a wet rag again to remove the dust and to make sure that we don't have that in the floor any longer.